Hit it, hit it.
Hello and welcome to the Marley Bird Knit Along sponsored by Red Heart. I'm so excited you're joining me on this journey to make the garter stitch shawl. As you know, this shawl is designed to be perfect for beginners and advanced knitters alike, and that's how I'm going to approach these videos. I'm going to walk you through step by step each section of this section, meaning I'm going to start you off with the cast on, show you how to knit, how to do a knit front and back, how to place your markers, and then I'm going to explain to you what those markers signify. I'm really going to use these videos as teaching tools so that you're not only making a project, but you're going to learn a lot more about your knitting along the way. Now, by this point, you should have downloaded your pattern and gathered your materials, and I'm dying to know what colors you guys chose. How about I share with you the colors I'm going to use for these videos? Take a look down here. I'm going to pull these colors into frame right here, and you can see I have 3 colors of Red Heart Soft, and I've chosen to use the white as my color A, and I've chosen to use the turquoise as my color C, which leaves the coral color for my color B. Now the color B should really be your pop color. It's the one that's really going to stand out on your shawl. And so for me, that makes me think of color A and color C as sort of like the background colors. Even though they are very predominant throughout the entire shawl, it's something about that color B that's really going to add that pop, there's no other better word for it, to your shawl. So make sure when you're choosing colors, you are thinking about that as you choose the colors. I don't know about you, but I feel like these colors are really nice and bright, and I think they'll be fun to wear spring, summer, or fall. I think it'll be the perfect little combination. Now, if you haven't had a chance to join the Facebook group that's been made for this knit along, please make sure and do that, because there are many people in there already sharing their color combinations and offering advice for other people's color combinations. And in general, we're making a really great community over there. So we're all there to help you along the way. So that way, as you're working on this particular section throughout the week and you need a little extra help, there's somebody there to answer your questions. So please go join the Facebook group, because it's a lot of fun over there. And there's always somebody there to help. Besides the Facebook group, as I mentioned, there are going to be videos, and we're going to release a video once a week, and this is the very first video. So in this video, as I said, I'm going to walk you through each section. If you're like me and you like to watch the entire video through before you jump in and start the project, great. If you are like some of my friends who just want to jump to the point in the section that they want to know more information about, if you look at the video description down there, I've put timestamps where the critical information is. So if you're looking for how to do the long tail cast on, you can find the timestamp for that. If you're looking for how to do a knit front and back, you can find the timestamp for that. If you're looking for how to change colors, you can find the timestamp for that. And then you can just jump directly to that point in the video. So I'm trying to really make this video as user-friendly as possible for, again, both beginners and advanced knitters alike. So without further ado, why don't we go ahead and take a look at one of the shawls I've already had made, and I'm going to show you what section you're going to make first. Okay, let's do that. So we're going to do section 1, but what does that mean? Well, let me show you. First off, I'm going to pull up a shawl that was knit by one of my #1 minions, Jenny Castaneda. And Jenny decided to use the heathered gray color, the honey color, and the light blue for her shawl. She really wanted this to be something she could throw on over like a white t-shirt and jeans, and maybe wear a jean jacket. And I think she really hit the mark here. I do want to point out that her honey is her pop color, and I think that that is just absolutely brilliant. So this is another example of a color you could choose for as far as a color combination. Now, As you can see, from this point to this point, this is section A, or this is the first section. This is what we're going to do this week. And you'll notice that it is all done in garter stitch, which is really super easy. What makes it complicated is that we're going to be working increases. Now, this is the top of the shawl, okay? This is the part where we are actually going to start with just 4 little tiny stitches. And then we're going to create increases with knit front and backs to gradually make this part of the shawl a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. And by the time we're done with color A, have about this big of a little section, right? At that point in time, it'll be time to change colors to the next color, which will be color B. And we'll do 2 rows with color B. And then we'll switch colors again to color C, and we'll do several rows with color C, okay? A couple things I want to point out about this section that are important, okay? First off, we're going to start right here with 4 stitches, and when we do our increases and place stitch markers, we're going to essentially put 1 stitch between 2 stitch markers right here. Then that's going to represent the center spine of our shawl. And we're going to have a stitch marker out here and out here also. And those stitch markers are going to help you remember that you're going to increase on the outside of the shawl every single row for the entire pattern. Okay, let me repeat that. Every single row throughout the entire pattern, you're going to increase 1 stitch in from the edge, all out here. The stitch closest to the edge is always going to be knit, always, always, always. And then 1 stitch in from the edge, we're going to do an increase to always increase there. What that's going to do is it's going to create a wingspan on the shawl that is wider than the depth of the shawl. If you take a look down here, I'm going to scoot this over, and you can see that just right here in this section that the wingspan portion of the light gray is a lot longer than the depth of the center spine. And then as the piece gets made even longer, it's the same thing. My wingspan gets a lot longer than the depth of my shawl. The last thing I want to point out is by the time you're done with this entire section, your shawl is going to be that wide. Oh my gosh, can you believe it? It's like, it'll look like it's actually becoming something. And I love that. You're going to be all geeked out, like, I can't wait to get to the next color to see what's going on. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you how to actually do the cast on for these few stitches right here, and I'm going to get you started with the increases, and then I will let you go ahead and knit along, and I'll show you how to do the color changes for the next 2 colors, and then I'm going to let you go on your merry little way and complete this section until next week's video. So go ahead, get your pattern, gather your materials, and let's jump in. All right, are you ready to start? Because I am. Let's go ahead and cast on and start this little adventure. As I said, I'm using the white as my color A, and I want to do a long tail cast on, so I want to make sure I leave a nice long tail. I'm going to put my slip knot up here, and that means I'm going to rest my tail along the palm of my hand, take my working yarn, have it wrap around my forefinger and my middle finger, and come back up and cross over. When I cross over, I turn my hand, and I go ahead, I go underneath the first stitch, and I grab the back one, and I pull. And that gives me my slip knot. I'm going to place my slip knot directly onto my needle, and that's going to count as a stitch. So that is 1 stitch. Now I'm going to do the long tail cast on. For the long tail cast on, I want you to take the tail, I want you to grab the tail just like this, and I want you to take your thumb and scoop it around the tail. You see that? So now I have this. Now what I want you to do is I want you to take the working yarn and let it go around your forefinger and I'm grabbing the tails down here just to give them some tension. Can you see that? I'm grabbing the bottoms of the yarn. And I have myself a nice slingshot. Let me try and move the yarn out of the way so you can better see. I have a slingshot. Can you see that? I'm going to readjust and do that one more time so you can see. I'm going to grab my tail and scoop. So now I have the yarn over my thumb. I'm going to have the working yarn over my forefinger and scoop it down like that, okay? So now it's on the outsides. I'm going to take my needle, I'm going to go to the palm of my hand, go up the thumb, swivel towards my finger, come down my finger, and then I have this nice little window created right there. So I'm going to swing my needle right through that window, let the yarn fall off my thumb, and pull. I'm going to do that one more time. I readjust. The yarn is on the outside of my thumb and outside of my finger. I take my needle, go up my thumb, down my finger, through the window, and off my thumb, and pull. I have 3, I need 1 more. I'm going to go up my thumb, down my finger, through the window, and off my thumb. I now have 4 stitches cast on. Now that we've cast on stitches, let's go ahead and start our row 1. The first thing you want to do is put the needle with all the stitches on it into your left hand, and that's the way you're going to knit the entire pattern. That's the way you actually knit. I'm going to remind you of that for at least the first 3 rows, and then I'm not going to remind you anymore. Row 1 says we're going to go ahead and we're going to start by knitting our very first stitch. So to knit, we take our right hand needle, go into the stitch from left to right, just scoop it right on into the stitch just like that. So it looks like this. You take your working yarn, wrap it around your right hand needle, and then take your right hand needle with that yarn and pop it back out of that stitch you went into on the left hand needle and let that stitch jump off. The next part of the instructions say we have to do a knit front and back, so I'm going to show you how to do that now. Knitting front and back is really simple. You're going to go into the next stitch just like you did before, so from left to right, go into the stitch. Yarn over your right hand needle and then pop that needle out that left hand stitch again, okay? But we're not going to let this stitch come off yet because we want to put a stitch into the back leg of that same stitch, and here's how we're going to do that. Take your right hand needle and extend it towards you just ever so slightly. Swivel around. Now go into the back leg of that same stitch. Can you see how I'm in the back leg of that same stitch? Yarn over your needle, come out that stitch, and now let it jump off. So we now have 2 stitches where before we only had 1. We have to do that one more time. So in the next stitch, we're going to go into it just like we're knitting, yarn over our right hand needle, come out that stitch, extend our right hand needle, swivel, go into the back leg of that same stitch, yarn over, come out that stitch, and now let it jump off. We knit the very last stitch just like normal. So we knit the last stitch, and what we have left, we have 6 stitches where before we only had 4. For row 2, we're going to carry on and we're going to add stitch markers this time. So as we add the stitch markers between our stitches, I'm going to explain to you what I want you to be sure to do with these stitch markers. Go ahead, put your needle with all of the stitches on it into your left hand once again, and we're going to begin with row 2, which is a right side row. You're going to knit the first stitch, which coincidentally is what you're going to do throughout the entire pattern. You're always going to knit that very first stitch. Now I want you to place a marker, and I'm going to have you grab a marker that is roughly the same size as the needle you are using. You don't want to use a marker that is way bigger than your needle because that will stretch out the stitches around the space that you have your marker there, and it'll give you unsightly ladders. So you want to make sure you're using a marker that is roughly the same size as your knitting needle. Place that marker directly onto your right hand needle and then carry on. The next part of the instructions say to go ahead and knit a front and back. Well, we know how to do that. We go into the next stitch as if to knit, and knit that stitch. So I go around my right hand needle, pop it out, extend my right hand needle, swivel, go into the back leg of that same stitch, yarn over my right hand needle, pop it out, now off. So I have 2 stitches where there was only 1. Now I'm supposed to place another marker, and what I want you to notice is I'm placing a marker that's a different color than the one I just used. In the first one I used a teal color. In the second one I'm using purple, and that's going to be significant. the color difference, not necessarily that it's pink or teal, it's just a different, or purple and teal. I'm not colorblind. I'm going to go ahead and knit the next stitch, and I'm going to add another marker, and this time I'm going to use the same color as the marker I just used. Okay, now I'm going to knit the next 2 stitches, so make sure that my yarn is coming over here, yarn over, knit 1, yarn over my needle, knit 2. Now I'm going to place my last marker, and this marker is teal, just like the first marker I used. Okay, I'm going to knit my very last stitch, and then I'm going to set my work down and show you what it is we've done. So I'm not turning my work yet, I'm literally just setting it down. Okay, now I'm going to place the markers kind of facing up just so you can better see what's happening. If you remember when I talked to you about the shawl, the outside stitches are always going to be knit. Okay, these outside stitches, that's the outside of our shawl right there. That stitch and that stitch is always going to be knit. As I'm knitting along, I knit this first stitch and I come across this teal marker. That is a clue for me, Marley Bird, me. Whether yours is purple, yellow, gold, teal, whatever it is, that first marker is your clue that your next stitch is an increase, okay? So I put my marker there after my first stitch to kind of be that, okay, silly, you need to make sure you do an increase on this next stitch, okay? Otherwise, I tend to forget. So that's why I had you put a marker right there, because this next stitch after that marker is always going to be a knit front and back throughout the entire pattern. Then we come over here and we get to our next marker, this purple marker. It actually surrounds the center stitch right there. So see, you have a purple marker on either side of the center stitch. That's going to be significant in that we want to know where that center stitch is throughout the pattern, because it is on the outside of those 2 markers, outside of those 2, that we're going to do an increase. Now those increases are at a different rate than the increases we're going to do out here on the outside of the shawl, and those will be listed in the pattern, and I will point those out as we go along in the sections. Okay, so don't worry about remembering those. The only thing I really want you to remember is that as you come across over here to this next side, you're going to see another teal marker, or whatever color your marker is, and that's another clue to you to say, oh, I need to make sure I work my increase right here before I get to my last stitch, which is always knit. Okay, so does that help you understand what these markers mean? I knit my first stitch, I have a teal marker, that means I have to do an increase in the next stitch, so I'm going to knit my front and back. I'm going to work in pattern, whatever that may be, over here to 1 stitch before my next teal marker. Oh, it's a teal marker. That lets me know I need to make sure I do an increase into that stitch. So I'm going to put a knit front and back into that stitch, slip my marker, and I knit my last stitch. The last thing I want you to do on this before you move it is to take a removable stitch marker, and I want you to place it literally just through the stitches on this side of the fabric. What that's going to do is signify that this is the right side of your work. It's really easy to go ahead and add that stitch marker so that you know it's the right side of your work. That way when you come home late from work and you're tired and all you want to do is pick up your knitting and knit, you don't have to sit there and look at your work to try and decipher whether it's the right side or the wrong side. All you need to do is find that marker, okay? It just makes things a lot easier. If you haven't picked it up already, these markers are there really just as tools to help you remember what to do. So this removable stitch marker is a reminder that you're on the right side of your work. The 2 teal stitch markers that I'm using are a reminder that I need to increase on the outside of my work every single row. And then my 2 center markers, those are my reminder that when it's time to increase in my center, it's going to be on either side of those purple markers. Okay? Now that we have all of our markers in place, let's go ahead and move on to row 3, and then we get to jump into the garter stitch pattern. For row 3, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pick up my work and I'm going to turn it. So that means I'm putting all of my stitches on that needle into my left hand. This is the last time I'm going to remind you of that, okay? Now it says in the very first part of row 3, we're going to knit this first stitch. which we already knew because I've told you that we're always going to knit the very first stitch. Now I see, oh, there's a teal marker. That's my clue that this next stitch is going to be an increase. So I'm going to do a knit front and back. Go into the stitch, knit the first leg, stretch, swivel, go into the back leg of that same stitch and knit it, pop it out and off. That's also written in the pattern, so you don't have to remember that. But again, that teal marker is there to remind you that you need to do that increase. The next part says I need to do another knit front and back. So I'm going to go into the next stitch, yarn over my needle, come out, stretch, swivel, go into the back leg, yarn over, come out and off. Slip my marker, knit the center stitch, slip my marker, and I have to do a knit front and back. So I'm in, around, out, stretch, swivel, in, around, out, off. One more time. And I can know that I'm going to do an increase there because I see my teal marker again. See how that really helps? I'm going to go in, around, out, stretch, swivel, in, around, out, off. Slip my marker and I knit my very last stitch. I'm going to set this down so we can see what it is we have here. Once again, we have stitches that are beginning to increase between the teal and the purple, on either side. Because remember, I told you these are triangles, but the rate of increases on the outside of the triangle and the center spine of the triangle, or of the shawl, I should probably call it, are going to be at different rates, okay? Because we're increasing every single row on the outside here, but we're not going to increase every single row down the center here. That is what we're going to talk about next. You've set up your shawl and you've added all of the stitch markers. Now it's time to get busy with the garter stitch pattern, okay? Look down here and let's jump in. The very first row is a right side row, and so I make sure I have the right side facing me because I have my removable stitch marker there. See how handy that is? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to knit the first stitch. I see my teal marker, so I slip my marker, and without even looking at the pattern, I know I need to increase this stitch right here, right? So I'm going to do a knit through the front leg, extend, swivel, knit through the back leg, out and off. Okay, so that's the very first one. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to knit to the last two stitches of the row, which means this is not an increase row down the center spine, okay? It's just knitting all the way down. So I get to ignore these purple markers. I just get to sloop them over, don't do anything special, sloop it over, and knit to the last two stitches, which happens to be one stitch before what? My teal marker. So I can see that teal marker and it's that clue of, hey Marley, make sure you do your increase here. So I go into the stitch, yarn over and come out, extend, swivel, go into the back leg, yarn over, pop it out and off. Slip my marker and I always knit the first and last stitch, remember? So once again, if I set this down, you can see I'm starting to increase my stitches between this purple and that teal and this purple and that teal. I'm going to go ahead, pick up my work, and I'm going to work row 2 just like I did row 1, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to knit the first stitch and then knit to the last 2 stitches. This time I'm going to hold my yarn in my left hand just like continental knitters. And all this is doing is holding the yarn in the opposite hand. The motion is exactly the same. I'm still knitting just like before. I'm still yarning over my needle just like before. I'm just holding my yarn in the opposite hand. There are some of you out there that are continental knitters, so I wanted to make sure that I showed you how to continental knit as well, because sometimes it's nice to see somebody doing it just like you do, correct? So here I am, I go in to my stitch, extend, swivel, go into the back leg of the stitch, yarn over and pop it out, slip my teal, and knit the last stitch. Row 3 of the garter stitch pattern is actually an increase row down the center spine, okay? So we are not only going to increase on the outside this row, but we're going to increase on either side of my purple markers. Let me show you what that means. As you look down here, we're going to go ahead, we're going to knit that first stitch. There's my teal marker, so I slip it, and I'm going to go ahead and do my knit front and back in the next stitch, just like I do throughout the entire pattern. Now I'm going to knit to within 1 stitch of my marker, my purple marker. So I'm knitting down, and I'm right here 1 stitch before my purple marker. And I'm going to do a knit front and back. So I go in and around, out, extend, swivel, and knit through the back leg. Slip my marker. I'm not going to do anything special to my center stitch. I'm just knitting it. And I slip my marker again, and that's my reminder of, okay, this next stitch, I need to also do an increase because I did one on the other side, right? These are very symmetrical. And now I'm going to go ahead and knit to the last 2 stitches, which so happens to be 1 stitch again before my teal marker. So I have my clue there that I need to make sure I do my increase. And I'm going to work my knit front and back, slip my marker, and then knit 1 stitch. Row 4 of the garter stitch pattern is just like row 1 and row 2. So I'm going to go ahead and work that row, and then I'm going to put my work down and show you what it is you should be looking at on your end as well. I just finished my row 4, and I'm going to set it down so that we can take a look at what yours should be looking like. As I set this down and I have all of the stitches resting on the needle, it's kind of hard to see that this is actually taking shape of a shawl, right? But if I take my needle and I scoot the stitches down onto the cable of my cable needle, it begins to take shape a little bit better. You can see here that this is the outside wingspan edge of my shawl. I have my teal markers out here to let me know that I'm going to increase along that edge, right? Every single row, at least when I'm coming after that marker and before this marker. Then I have my 2 center markers, my 2 purple ones that are on either side of that center stitch. What those signify is that when it's time to do my increase down the center spine, it's going to be done on either side of those purple markers. You're going to repeat rows 1 through 4 to maintain this pattern. And you're going to notice that on every row 3, you're going to increase down the center spine. All the subsequent rows, so row 1, 2, and 4, you're just going to increase on the outer wingspan. Another way to think of that is that every other right side row, you're going to increase down the center spine. Whichever way works for you to think about it, whether it's every time I'm on my row 3, I need to make sure I'm doing my increases on the outside and the center spine. And then on rows 1, 2, and 4, it's only on the outside. Or if you want to think about it, every other time I see my right side row marker, I want to make sure I'm also increasing down my center spine. Whichever way works for you, go with it. I think that if you're a beginner, it's best to just go along with the rows 1 through 4 and just put a tick mark next to the row every time you finish it. So that way if you finish row 1, tick it off. Finish row 2, tick it off. And you'll be able to know, 1, if you put your work down, you come back, which row you just finished with, because it'll be the last one that has the tick mark. And number 2 is that as you're working along, you have to take a phone call, you can go back and be like, oh, okay, I just finished row 2, it's time for me to do a row 3, which happens to be a right side row. Am I on a right side row? Well, you don't have to sit there and look too hard, right? Because you've already marked it with your removable stitch marker. So all of this works together and you already are knitting along and you don't have to worry too much about it. See how those markers really tend to help you out? What you need to do now is repeat rows 1 through 4 3 more times, or until you get 51 stitches. Okay, so you want to have 25 stitches, 1 center stitch, 25 stitches. Okay, meet me back here once you have that number of stitches, and I'm going to show you how to change colors to color B. Okay, it's really simple, it's not that difficult, but it's something I do want to show you how to do. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. You have all of color A completed and it's time to jump in and do color B. Let's do that. One of the first rules in knitting is to never put a knot in your knitting, right? So what's the first thing I'm going to show you to do? I want you to put a knot in your knitting. Now, I'm having you put a knot in your knitting with the understanding that when it's time to weave in your ends, you're going to undo this knot. All I'm going to have you do is grab your color B, and I want to take your color A, rest it on top of color B, and just tie a knot. Really simple, nothing big fancy, just tie it right on there. Okay, what this allows you to do is slide the new color up the old color right next to the needle, and it will allow you to begin knitting with the new color without it coming really loose down here at the end. I hate it when my stitches become really loose, so I always will just tie on my new color to my old color, but then before I go and weave in my ends, I will go ahead and undo that knot. Now, speaking of the ends, I want you to make sure that you leave at least 4 to 6 inches to weave in your ends, okay? It just makes things a lot easier. Now let's go ahead and jump in. Now that my color B is ready to go, I can go ahead and get started with the next part of my pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to knit the first stitch, but this time I'm going to knit it with my new color. My old color has been cut off with a nice long tail and it's just hanging out there. I can slip my marker and go ahead and do my knit front and back into the next stitch. By this point, you happen to know this pattern, I'm sure. So why don't you go ahead, knit the next 2 rows, and then come back here and I'm going to show you once again how to change colors so that you're ready to start color C, okay? I've knit my 2 rows of color B and I'm going to jump in and change the color C so that you can see what it looks like. As you look down here, you can see I have my work and it looks really great. My color B has just one nice garter ridge and that's what I want. I can already tell it's really going to pop against this white. Now I want to make sure I do leave a nice long tail just like before. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my color B, leaving a nice long tail. Get that out of the way. And I know that most of you will appreciate this, but when I pulled out the center pull for my color C, I didn't get any yarn gut. So that was really exciting. I wanted to share that with you. I'm going to take my color C and I'm going to rest my color B on top of it and make sure that I just tie my nice little knot directly on top of my color B, push it right on up there, and I make sure I left a nice long tail. And I go ahead and I can carry on in my pattern using my new color. So I'm going to go ahead and let you see what that looks like, and this time I'm going to hold the yarn continental again. So I'm going to knit my first stitch without even looking at the pattern. I know that's what I'm supposed to do. And I have my teal marker, so I slip it, which means I need to do a knit front and back into the next stitch because it's an increase. And I go ahead and I work along. Now, I know for a fact that I am working on a row 3, correct? Because I went ahead and I did a row 1 and 2 with my color B. All right, so now you know the basics. You know how to cast on, how to knit, how to do a knit front and back, how to place your markers and what those markers mean, and how to change colors. That's literally everything you need to know to complete this section. What I want you to do is go ahead and complete the full garter stitch section, and then next week when the next video comes out for the next section, we will be ready to begin the stripes, which will incorporate a row of pearls in your stitches. So that's it, you guys. I hope that you're ready to go and you can't wait to see how these colors all start to work together in your section 1. Go ahead, complete the whole section, and then join me next week as we begin section 2. Don't forget to join that Facebook group, and if you have any questions or concerns, make sure you share them there because there are a lot of us there to answer them for you. I hope you're enjoying this knit along so far, and you will come back for more. Hit subscribe so that you're up to date whenever there's a new video released, and make sure you smash that like button, as my kids say. I'm Marley Bird, proud spokesperson for Red Heart Yarns, and you are doing the Marley Bird Garter Stitch Shawl Knit Along, sponsored by Red Heart Yarns. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.